That one's now on. I have another one if you want it.
Can this one slide over?
Yes, ma'am. So you.
I was just going to sit right here. Can you see that? Oh, yeah. You know what? Why don't we just use it? Captures us all. So Brian is not presenting at 1 o'clock.
No, yeah, it's at 2:30.
Okay,
So,
I was like, "Where's Brian? Kick him out."
yeah, and in fact, he's in this room, I guess.
Oh, is he really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. This is the one and only session for the conference.
Are you at 425 I Street? Then?
No, I'm here in Dallas.
Oh, you are? Okay, okay. Well, that's kind of nice.
But I was at 811.
Oh, you were? Okay.
I know, that's what Jordan was saying, that you guys are going to start now coming to DC. I know every 3 weeks though. So we'll at least
It will not be every 3 weeks.
No, I know.
I really hope not. So where's the speaker rating back?
James up right there. Our jeans. I said you buy me.
Still stand. But I will. Ready? There. So now you don't have to run it while you're talking. Oh, and that's even better. No. I may have a question or two.
Okay, well, that kind of
So Brandon, do you mind if I drive the train here? Because I never get to touch buttons at home, so I'm pretty excited about it.
So you're gonna be staying busy with phones and stuff.
Applications for one. So, yeah, I was doing capital support. I was doing 3 jobs. Finally, hired Delango, brought him over. So now, like, now 3 of them are doing capital support, so I can kind of get these folks in this after that. Good jam. So, we used to sit down chit chat for a while Wednesdays, man.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, yeah, things have changed, and of course now Brady's in CFO is kind of cool. It's because now I've got more information from her and some me and everything. So, relationship's good, so that helps a bunch. So
Yeah.
it's good to have. So
Yeah, should chat and catch up.
yeah. We got 3 minutes. I don't know if we're gonna fill this thing.
Yeah, it doesn't look.
It's okay. No, we're not. No. We had 3 minutes, Brandon. I don't want to rush it. I just.
Jordan's like, cut it out, girls. Love fest is over.
I would never say that to either one of you. Ever. So I'm afraid of the beat now. What? I know. What do you want to do? Yeah, I think so. Oh, Ted Deacon's here.
Look at that.
Information. Yep. Wow. I don't have a car I'd give it to you.
I know.
I'm saving the environment.
I have 3 cars.
You cross off
Cross down.
right in the new information.
I'm the one that is the person doing this job. It was when they gave me the 100s. The person who did it, I am not doing this job in 6 months, and I didn't get anyway. So now I have to start literally 100. Because I'm not in that position.
I think you should scratch my light.
I think I should too.
Yeah, just
be very.
Just face it.
I mean, the first name is still the same. Everything else is get it in my email? Ted?
I just want to get a chance to.
Well, Mr. Ryder,
Can I ask what?
Wes, how are you?
you met
Good. Don't heckle me.
I can't promise you.
Hi.
Bell.
Hi, Bill. How are you?
Good.
Good.
There are moderator remarks underneath the podium there if you need to know what to say.
Okay.
And also the session is going to be recorded. So for the
Uh-oh.
Q&A,
Okay.
make sure that you repeat their name and company so it's captured on the recording.
Okay.
But should be some.
Well, this is what. Yeah, I have my own handwritten, but yeah, I don't see any. But that's okay. Well, it's up here, Bill. Yeah, it's up here. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, there's still some people coming in here. What's that? Well, I'm just gonna start in about a minute or two.
You're the moderator.
Once everyone's seated. He's still coming. Oh, it's a Leo A. Daily guy. No wonder he's late.
I'm not going to say anything.
All right. You guys ready to go? Hi, good afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Pete Yakowitz. I'm with Leo Daily, and I'm pleased to be able to moderate the session on the VA leasing program. First, a few housekeeping items. If you need to leave in an emergency, there's the big doors you came in. Those are the doors you go out. We would ask you to please silence your phones. I know people may want to take pictures of the presentation or whatever, but just make sure the sound is off. And also, as far as restrooms, they're out that door. Men's is over there. Women's is over there. And this is the session on the VA's leasing program business opportunities. If that's not the session you signed up for, I just gave you an excuse to leave by telling you where the bathrooms are. No judging if you need to go. So I said, my name's Pete Yakowitz. I'm with Leo A. Daily. We are a consulting firm that's been doing business with the VA for 70 years. We do design, bid, build, design, build, assessments, studies, all kinds of work for the VA. Also included in that, we have worked on VA leases on both the preparation of solicitation document side and also on the developer side as their design partner. Not both for each procurement because that's legal, so we don't do that. I've been with Leo Daily for about 5 years, and part of that time I had the privilege of working for the VA for 33 years, and also had an honor of working with some of my panelists here who I'd like to introduce. I would ask, first of all, that if you can, please save your questions till the end of the session, and they'll be up here as long as it takes to take your questions. And so I want to introduce Jordan Benware with VA. He's with OCAM's office in VA. And then we have Brandy Stockstill. She is with CFM in VA. And then we have Brandy Miller-Carr, and she's with VHA Property Leasing Service. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the first Brandy, correct?
Thank you guys. Thank you guys for joining us today. Some of these slides are going to be basic information that you guys have heard over, especially for the VA folks. So I apologize if it's information that is repetitive, but it's information that we want to make sure that you guys have out for and the latest information, so that if there are questions as to how you can speed your leases up, we're hoping this is a session that will help you get some answers for that. So, and if by chance, I know I've been with VA for a long time, if by chance I can't see you, it's because I'm getting older and I can't see your face very clearly. So if I apologize if I know you and you ask a question, so I'm just going to say that up front. So anyway, so leasing options that we have within VA, specifically we have for those minor leases that are less than $1 million in annual rent, they have opportunities to be able to extend when they expire. You can have exceeding leases. You can have replace them in the normal process before they expire. We're going to have a couple slides on the as-built clinic and the as-built process that we have been working on for the past couple months. Hoteling. Hoteling is something that and I worked 25 of my years in VHA, and last year I went over to CFM, and I actually learned a lot about the leasing processes that maybe we didn't explain to the VHA folks very well. And one of the things that we have from GSA is an option for hoteling. And basically what that is like the WeWork. I know Anne-Marie had asked a question about the WeWork space. What options do we have with that? Well, GSA allows there to be 18 months of an existing space that you just go in and work. So that's hoteling, and that's a policy right now. The only reason why we haven't, from the CFM perspective, distributed that out to the medical centers, to the administrations actually, is because we're trying to get an extension from GSA to go from 18 months out to 5 years, just to kind of mirror like the permit that we have, as well as the revocable licenses. But it's available today, so you can do hoteling. If you guys have any questions, let us know on the policy. Emergency leases are emergency leases that happen just because some natural disaster comes and you have a need for it. A lot of people have been asking about our Vision 6 support that we've offered and been able to help Vision 6. Again, with the whole focus of trying to get to the end, the activation, so that patients have the first use as quick as possible. You have all of these options that you're trying to do. It seems to be something that Dr. Stone has as a priority. And so one effort that was asked of CFM was, Vision 6 has 3, now 4, very large leases, major leases that are greater than even the GSA prospectus level. And so it takes them a little bit to get to the actual GSA resolution and then to the actual working documents and beginning the design and construction. But they have a need today. And so Dr. Stone, as well as Deanne Seekins, Vision 6 Network Director, said, how can you help CFM? You guys, if there's an opportunity, you can guide us in one way or another. But so any advice that I can give you, like George, Brandy's boss, said, it's not like it's any different than what the authorities you guys have now. It's just a focused effort. So you get an integrated project team. This is what Vision 6 did. They have the planner from Vision 6 who's running it, kicking some butt. And he has the visit engineer on the team as well. Every medical center who is part of this has a planner and an engineer, and there's a weekly call every Thursday. And on these calls, there's action items. And again, Dan Johnson is keeping track. He's a great facilitator trying to get this effort done. They limited their effort to primary care and mental health, outpatient mental health. And so because they've allowed those primary care and mental health, it then focuses on that you don't need a lot of specialty, you don't need a lot of extra conditions for the building, something that possibly available clinic space you can move into. And then the other caveat that they did is that it has to be a bridge lease to get to your major lease. So, and it can be multiple leases because these major leases are like 150 to 200,000 square feet. So multiple leases would be, like these smaller ones will be what they need now to fill what they have for the gap for these larger leases. But because they're doing the bridge lease to the major lease, you get to bypass the advanced, or the, what is it, the AEP?
Yeah, it's
Access Expansion Plan process. So that's BHA's Office of Policy and Planning requires the AEP process. But because these bridge leases have already, or the initial lease has already been approved by the OPP from the AEP expansion, or the AEP process, these bridge leases don't have to go through that process. So not that that takes a lot of time, but it does take time. And so when you're trying to get care to your veterans today, that's a big process and that can impede your getting a clinic opened. And so that's really all it is. So they have this concerted effort. They don't have to do the AEP process. They have a weekly call. They started with the market research, what's available in the community today that we can just move into. Found a bunch of places, wrote the RLP, and then went to the market and were able to find a bunch of space. I want to say that there was a space that they were able to find, like 60,000 square feet of space that was available. And because these are for major leases, that authority that we have with major leases allows us to be able to use that space, even though that trips the major lease threshold at that smaller level. So it's an opportunity that exists today. You just have to have that focused IPT at the VISN or at the medical center that's willing to do that and spend the time, and you guys can get your quick spaces as well. So I don't know if that's, there's just been some questions out there of how's that any different, and it's really not. It's just more of a focused effort. So then we have the sharing use of space agreements that we have out there, but right now that's only limited to academic affiliates, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Revocable licenses, we'll talk a little bit more about that. We have a slide on that. Permits and then easements. Yeah. You betcha. Sorry. Okay, so this slide, the next three slides are slides that we are going to send out as a, and that's the reason they have draft on, is because our Boston CFM likes to bless everything before it gets sent out. And so he's not yet blessed this, but this is all technical information that came from our real property law group as well as our policy office. So there might be a couple tweaks in it, but this is the document that will be sent out as the guide. This, for those VHA folks who have seen the out leasing document for the opportunities that we have for people using our space, that quick reference guide that we created a couple years ago, this is very similar. This is our in leasing guide where it talks about when VA goes and uses someone else's space. So the first three are basically what you guys know today. Minor leases, leases that are less than $1 million in unserviced rent. The major leases are leases that are greater than $1 million unserviced rent. But a new one that we have been, I'm not sure that VHA folks have really been aware of it, only because we didn't act upon it correctly in VA. But these major prospectus level thresholds, any lease that's greater than GSA's threshold has to have its second, has to have GSA's authorization committees also resolving it. So it's called GSA's resolution. So once that, if we have a major lease with the unserviced annual rent that's greater than their GSA threshold, it has to go to GSA's committees for authorization. So we have that, it changes every year. This year it's 3.095. And so we have like 5 of our major leases that have been over with GSA. One got released last week. And so it's a slow process. We sent it over in March. Unfortunately, it's a time thing. So I think that's another reason why, for those of you who have major leases, what VISN 6 was doing with their bridge lease effort, was something that they needed to do because they had 3 of those leases that were stuck in that GSA resolution. But that is something too, if you're major lease tripped, that's what an additional step we have to wait for. We don't have any control over at all. And then we have occupancy agreements for GSA who executes our major or any of our leases that we for our administrative space or those that are currently in a pilot with VHA. They are done through an occupancy agreement. And then we have the hoteling like we had talked about earlier, and then permits that allow us to go work with some federal land, federal buildings as well. Revocable licenses we're going to talk about shortly. Enhanced sharing use of space. So right now, many times when you guys have heard enhanced sharing use of space, it's talking about someone coming and using VA space, but this document or this also allows us on a short-term basis to go use someone else's space. The authority says that we can use the sharing use of space for academic affiliates only, and when it's what our lawyers have said is that that space has to be just very similar to a hoteling. That has to be that it's just a section of their area. You can't go in and take over their floor. They say that the authority doesn't allow that, so that's one of the authorities that we're going to hopefully try to change so that you guys have more flexibility and can take over a floor, because a lot of our academic affiliates do have available space, underutilized space that we need to capture. But right now, at this point in time, it's just for academic affiliates. And the last one is easements. If you have some type of like utility easement, that's one of our sharing, or our in-leasing options as well. Okay, so a little bit of the revocable license information. Last year, CFM gave policy out that basically opened up revocable licenses to allow for us to go and use anybody's space, whether it's a cost, and there were some parameters, but it really opened it up to a lot of use. It was not, according to our real property law group, it was not in conformance with the requirements that VA has. That we're not allowed to spend money on someone else's property without there being some type of binding agreement. And so we created a new policy. It got distributed to all the administrations back at the end of September. And it basically says revocable licenses can only be used if there's no cost or no consideration. I know, unfortunately, that then forces you, then you have to go to the leasing process, but that's why we went through the list of leasing where you have opportunities that maybe you didn't know about, like hoteling, and the as-built that hopefully will get going and get you guys some space sooner. We know that space is critical. There's a lot of need out there for space. I want to say the last time I looked at our strategic capital investment planning process, like the whole gap for the 10 years was like 10 million square feet. So I know that there's a lot of space that's needed out there. But okay, so on revocable licenses, sorry, one key point that I wanted to say, if by chance you do have a revocable license that does have some type of money currently being expended towards it, our real property law group has allowed us to go to September 30, 2020 to finalize that and turn that into a regular lease if it expends money. If it doesn't expend money, you can be a revocable license. But after September 30, unfortunately, we are not allowed to use expend any more dollars towards it. So please make sure you're getting those turned into leases.
Thanks, Brandy. As-built leases is a new concept that's come out from Dr. Stone. Dr. Stone was briefing some network directors, and out of that briefing, network directors expressed the need to be able to execute leases quicker, and so this as-built concept was developed. And the expectation is that these leases will be done in 90 to 120 days. And again, it's minimal to no TI, so it's an improvement. Essentially, market research up front is very critical. The thought process is there's a need for mental health primary care only at this point, and we're looking in the community to find existing spaces that will meet our needs. So again, contracting and engineering will work together to find those areas, and that way we figure out if it meets our needs and we can execute. So as-built are 10,000 square feet or less. To fall under the simplified lease acquisition threshold or the SLAT threshold, it has to be $250,000 annual unserviced rent or below, and they cannot exceed 5 years. So again, these are really meant for bridge leases. So if you have a pending major lease or one that's being built out, or to penetrate the market in an area that you think you have good veteran population and you want to try to just see if that's going to be a clinic that's going to be well received in that area. So again, instead of doing like a 15, 20-year lease, just to do the 5-year lease to see if it's one that you want to make into a larger lease. So one other thing with as-built is that they get a categorical space delegation from GSA, so that's different than a regular lease. So typically a regular GSA delegation takes about 30 days for a smaller lease. These can be turned around in 2 or 3 days, so that's one thing that helps speed that along. So it's a new process. We're still working on it internally. I wish I could tell you that, we're going to meet 90 days right now. We have, I think, 30 submissions and 10 have been approved. Lisa down here, Visa 9Cam, is the one who's winning the race at this point in time. Yeah, so, but we are trying our best to get to that date and just work out the kinks as go along. So.
And I will be remiss if I don't explain who Dr. Stone is. Sorry for those of you who don't know who Dr. Stone is. Sorry, kept referring to him, and he is VHA's executive director I'm so sorry. What? It's like executive in charge of VHA. Ugh, sorry about that. So he's the guy who can manage everything in the direction that VHA goes. So, okay, so some of the things that we need to do to help our leases better compete in the market is looking at opportunities to make them less restrictive, right? Less restrictions should increase the competition, one would think, right? Okay, so the one thing that we were able to do this past year was get a central fund for the lump sum for the tenant improvements, whichever you call it, for our major leases, which was a win. And people have pros and cons for one way or the other, but it was a win in the sense of being able to allow a quick access to the funds when funds are needed, so that we didn't have to bother the medical centers. But another opportunity that we are looking at is looking at our request for proposal special requirements. For those of you who have major or minor leases, right now some of them have that guidance that say you can't be next to a liquor store, you can't be in a residential area, and you can't be next to a gun shop. What we're finding is many times, if by chance we're getting protests that come back and say, well, Walmart's right across the street. Oh yeah, Walmart, but it's not a liquor establishment. So we're finding ourselves that you can't answer it one way or another, but at the same time, you build the lease or the lease is there, and then the liquor store might pop up next door anyway. So despite the fact that you went and did your evaluation, that liquor store might have come and built in the place even though you did your evaluation. So we're looking at those technical requirements that we have in there to help possibly make it easier for people to actually bid and get more competition. So that's one thing. The other one is standards. Right now, for those of you who know about leases, you know that there's like 3 different policies that are conflicting within VA. And so we're trying to make sure that we have the right guidance that we can have in those leases for you, but it's also to make sure that we're not being restrictive in what those leases must have. Like, we do not need the full physical security requirements. We do not need the full actual security requirements. And so from a perspective of making sure we have the right policy for you guys, one policy that's not conflicting is another opportunity that we're trying to do, but also lessen the burden on the lessors out there so that we don't have a lot of actual requirements that are in these leases, because our veterans now go to the community and care, and these buildings are not constructed or have the blast proof that we have in our own. So there's a lot of changing in the thoughts of what our leases potentially need to be, so that will also hopefully lessen the cost of what the tenant improvement would be for your lease. One of the things that Dr. Stone has mentioned last month, and I saw Brian just left, but he had talked about increasing the resilience in our leases. So I know that that's a discussion that's not gone far. Has that gone any further? Okay. But it's just something that people are talking about because like these fires that have been out in California, if you're losing the clinic because there's not an emergency generator, then you may not be able to continue the clinic for that day. It's impacting services for our veterans. So I know that's one of the things Dr. Stone is looking to try and improve. A national broker contract is something that we hope to have. It's going to be on the streets, I think, second quarter of FY20. But what that is hopeful to be able to help you all is from any of your leases, you can be able to tap into this broker contract to be able to help with the services that you need for the broker services. So that's a hopeful help. And that last bullet is the same thing as the first bullet. Sorry. I added that because I thought I didn't put it in, and then I realized it's there. So sorry about that.
Okay. In 2016, the SCOTUS of the U.S. Came up with the decision on kingdomware. Prior to this time, it was questionable about whether leases actually applied to the public law. So this decision actually made it very clear that leases are impacted by this decision, and that contracting officers can restrict competition to service disabled, veteran-owned small businesses and veteran-owned small businesses. So one of the things that the contracting officer is responsible for doing is searching the VIP pages, the veteran information pages, to see whether there are any SDVOSBs or VOSBs that actually can qualify under the category of the NICS code. So based on that, they go and they seek a capability statement from them to see whether they can actually meet the needs of the lease. And if so, then they're solicited. I'm sorry, did you have a question? Okay. So that's really important because prior to this time, it was really questionable about whether it impacted leases. So that's really all there is to say on that. That is a resource that the contracting officer will be using to make sure that veterans are included more in this process as business owners and involved in the leasing process. Okay.
So the last slide, I just wanted to kind of share with you what we had on the operating plan for FY20. So we have 225 leases on the VHA operating plan. So every lease on that list is SCIP approved, which SCIP is our strategic capital investment planning tool. So they've all been vetted through SCIP. Some have rolled over for past fiscal years. They didn't get executed in a previous fiscal year. So we have 225. The average size is roughly 13,500 net usable square feet. And they're all different types of leases: clinical, admin, parking. And as Brandy mentioned earlier, they're not just brand new leases. I call those new leases. I don't know if that's a proper term or not. That's what I use. We have replacement. We have succeeding, which means folks want to stay in the same building. We have superseding leases where you have a multi-tenant building. We're in that building. We just want to expand by a little bit. So again, there's a bunch of different types of leases on that operating plan, and so they range from anywhere between 1,000 square feet on up to 25, 30,000. So again, the average is about 13,500. So.
And this last slide is if you by chance don't know us and want to contact us, here's our information. All right, so what can we answer for you guys?
So I think what we're going to do is they're actually recording this session, and they want to be able to hear. So I think I'm going to bring the microphone out to people. Is it still on? There we go. So if you have a question, just please, if you can make your way over to the center if I can't reach you, and just state your name, your company, and your question.
Good afternoon. My name is Tim Pedro with TTL Associates. We enjoy our working relationship with the VA. Brandon, if I go back to you, you were talking about the national broker contract coming out in 2020, second quarter. Can you expand on, you made a comment about I thought you said you can access that. Can you elaborate, please? Thank you.
Can you hear me now? Okay. I was just didn't hear you. Okay, so I apologize for that. The national broker contract is something that will be the PHA staff will be able to access and to be able to do their contracts for any broker needs that they have. It's in CFN is the office that I'm at, and when you look at the organizations within VA, you have CFN, VHA, and the different administrations, VBA and NCA. And so CFN is executing a contract to be able to allow the different administrations to access that national contract. Currently, the only contract that works for the national or that broker coverage is within CFN. So we're just expanding that to allow the administrations. Sorry about that. Sorry for the confusion.
That's good. Thank you.
you, Peter. Hi, I'm Daniel Cross and Company at Frederick, Maryland. We're an existing VA contractor. I was with Tony Costa on a panel last week. Question on Kingdomware application, prospectus versus non-prospectus. So far, what we tend to see, Florence and Rock Hill being current examples, is the LCO has come out and asked the OSBs for their market price letter with the intent of doing a set-aside. But we rarely see that at the larger facilities. Fredericksburg, no such letter came out. What determines when you're going to solicit from the VSOB, from veteran-owned small businesses or service-able veteran-owned small businesses that have responded at the level of the EOI? Where do you determine whether or not you're going to put it out for that based off of size or contract size, please?
Hi, my voice can't hear. I would say that being my experience as a contracting officer, I would say it has to do with competition, because the leases that are at the simplified lease acquisition threshold and below, you're not required to be competition, but you do have to make sure that you have 3 in document the file if you don't have at least 3 sources. So above that, they actually should be going anyway, regardless of level. But I would think that you would see more of the larger ones. So I'm really surprised that you're not seeing them. Okay.
I would suggest it's the reverse. We see the small ones,
Right.
we don't see the large.
That's what I'm saying. I'm surprised that it's not the other way around. My question to you is, are you able to? Because we had, for example, prior to my current position in VHA, the leasing center where we do mostly policy, I was the deputy director of contracting for the Southwest, which is now 22G. And we entertained, because we were in a highly rural area, we entertained offers from people who may not live in that or be based in that area, but willing to do business in that area. So are you looking specifically for the Frederick location, or are you willing to compete and go to other areas?
My company competes any contract in the country. Most of our relationship is with CFM, and that would go to the issue of, do we have to go out to each of the VISNs to see their deals?
I would, especially for their requirement for forecasting opportunities. So I would totally look there. And then there should be still a list of each small business representative for each one of the network contracting offices. Reach out to that person, because they can actually tell you, based on the forecasting, what's coming up and what to expect.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have a gentleman with his own microphone, so go ahead.
Thank you.
Who else has a question?
For anybody on the panel, leasing has always been a hit and miss, depending upon who you're working with. So is there going to be some type of consensus training to leasing contracting officers, and where will they be sitting? Will they be sitting at the local level? Are they going to go to the regional level, or are they going to go to CFM, depending upon the size? Because that's one of the things that we see is that, as he was bringing up, it's not consistent across the board. And what is CFM and VA as a whole doing to try and improve that?
So I guess let me understand your question. This is local, but you can totally jump in. So are you asking who gets the requirement, or who's going to be the contracting officer, or what? Just help me understand your question.
Yes, loaded question here. I just retired as the director of acquisition for VBA. One of the challenges we had was consistency in the system. Brandy's aware, because in my role as the VISA 19 CAM, we were challenged in our area because it was highly rural. Okay, and sometimes we couldn't get to the firms that might have that opportunity because the contracting officer was not sophisticated enough to understand the options available to him or her. So is there something afoot there in the background to train these people in this process so that it's not so hard? Because it's difficult to get a lease in when you don't have a lot of competition, and the leasing contracting officer is the only one you can go to because they're the only ones with that warrant.
Right. One of the things that we can do in VHA is definitely make clear to the lease contracting officers in the rural area to actually what to do, that you can actually consider, others from other areas. Because that's exactly what we had to do in now 22G for a lot of their leases in rural areas of New Mexico and northern Arizona. So that's something that we actually can talk to them about. We had to go a little bit further, even though we had really small leases of 3,500 to 5,000 in certain those areas. We had to apply really, which is pretty much a more formal approach to getting people to actually compete in those areas, which is doing the small business conferences, but also doing the pre-proposal conferences, even before you get the solicitations out there. Actually going and doing industry days and things like that to say, hey, we desperately need, people, even if you sit in West Texas, we have a requirement in, northern Arizona, if you're a construction company and you want to actually, compete or however you want to be involved in the leasing process, here are requirements, please. Especially at the time, I think we were communicating women-owned businesses, because we had certain, small business categories that we needed to perform a little bit better in. So I can definitely pass that on to my director and communicate that with the leasing community of VHA.
And just tag on to what Randy was saying, the three charts that were at the beginning of the slides where it talked about the different opportunities for in-leasing, that as soon as we have that finalized, because it talks about all the different policies and such that we have, like hoteling and local licenses, we will be doing training on that to ensure that all administrations also have what this means and how to get access to it all, because it is an opportunity that we've been not necessarily, it's been available, and like the hoteling has been available, it's just people don't know about it and how to access it and what they need to do to access it. So those are the opportunities that we need to ensure everybody has a handle on. But there's like two other policies that we're trying to do, and CFM, for years they've not done policies, but now they're doing policies. So I think that once we get these other two policies completed, we will then do maybe larger training so that we incorporate all of these and ensure at least people understand the basics and how to access them.
Doug?
Thank you. My name is Brian Volkin. I own a small AE firm, service disabled veteran-owned business. Very good. Thank you for talking. But I think a lot of your discussions today was focused internal to the VA. I think most of the people in the room would like to see a list of those 220 leases you have available and who the leasing authority is going to be. Do you have that? Is that? Yeah. Well, somebody's got it here, but is that something you're going to make available today?
So the operating plan itself is internal, but all the leases that are on that list are actually in the president's budget. So if you go to va.gov, under budget, you go to 2020, it's actually volume 4 for construction and leases. You'll see all the leases around this. That's the opportunity that we'll have for there may be more than 2025. That's what we're looking at forecasting for 20. The budget for 21 comes out in January. So
I think a big help for us would be not only that list that's on the president's budget, but who's the leasing authority? Who do we go to? It's going to be done at CFM, it'll be done at region, it'll be done locally. It's hard enough figuring out if you're within the VA who's doing it. Imagine for the people that aren't in the VA, and that's really, I think, something that we could use, that information put out, maybe at this conference.
In general, CFM is the one managing and executing those leases that are major leases. VHA's contracting officers are the ones that do the minor leases. So that's the general, although CFM does have a handful of minor leases that they're executing, and there's various reasons for that, but for the most part, that's probably the best guidance you can do is start with your LCR and your NCO for those that are minor leases. Does that help? No? Yeah.
The can.
Go to the can.
Go to your can. Brian, go to your can.
Citizen capital asset managers have a lot of information on a lot of resources that they do not know the answer. So go to your citizen camp. And that goes to you.
Doug Erickson. I'm the capital asset manager for VA New York, New Jersey Healthcare Network. I have a question for Jordan on the as-built clinics. The one of the thank you, Jordan. One of the questions that, or one of the issues that we often run into, even if we can find suitable space that's been used as a clinic that requires very minimal TI, is the IT requirements, because we're putting computers in every room, and so how are we dealing with that with the as-built clinics?
To be honest, not really well. So Vision 10 is, they didn't really, they haven't long got approved, and we've been meeting IT, and that's one of the issues we're having. They're telling us that they won't start any type of procurement for rack or anything until the lease is signed, and then it could be 30 to 60 days. So obviously, that's something that we're working with. I was supposed to be having some meetings this week about that, but obviously I'm here. So to be perfectly honest, it's a struggle, and I don't have the answer right now. And it's obviously not just going to be me. It's going to be a lot of people trying to get together and coming up with a viable solution that is going to be outside the box thinking. Can't do what we've always done all the time. This doesn't work. So Dr. Stone's not going to accept that answer, and I'm not going to be the guy that delivers that answer to him. So we're going to figure it out. That's all I can tell you.
Just a quick follow-up. What about the TI costs associated with the IT? That's what I'm also referring to.
So there's really no budget for TI. So we said minimal TI. So obviously what Ed and Brian and I have kind of come up with essentially is we don't want to build any walls, take any walls down, or move any walls. Other than that, you know, if you take the carpet out or you know, add some outlets, stuff like that, that to me is perfectly acceptable. So again, that's open to interpretation, and I think I like my interpretation pretty well. So we're gonna go with that. So far so good. And so again, there's really no, if you say it's gonna be $50,000, $100,000, that it's written in that dollar, and so do what you need to do. I just want you to get patience in there.
It's Michael Beasley with Apogee Consulting. How do you guys notify the public that a lease opportunity is now going to be considered for, like, you know, where you want to say, hey, you got an area that you want to, let's say, an outpatient clinic? How does that notification come out?
So we use the Federal Business Opportunity Site, but that is changing over, and forgive me, the system is new and I have not had a chance to really run it or be trained to get access on it yet. But even before then, each one of the regions have to do a forecasting of opportunities where they tell those requirements that I believe are over 25,000. Forgive me, the threshold may have changed. Where before they issue the solicitation, they tell you pretty much everything that they have at or over that level. So you could even start.
The reason I ask, I look at FBO a lot. I don't recall seeing many of those come out in the past few years. That's why I was curious if there was another way that those were notified that those opportunities were coming out.
Yeah, the smaller ones, they're regulated by, we have to use GSA's acquisition regulation. So the smaller ones, I believe the threshold is 10,000 square feet. So if it's under that, they don't have to advertise. So they use a lot of local resources like the brokers, you know, or the newspapers and things like that. So they don't have to put it in FBO. So that's why it's really important. Really early, I think, gave the example of looking at what's in the budget. You can take a look at what's available for the major and the minor leasing construction, leasing projects early, and then get to know the local small business specialists for the minors for your NCO region, and then put you in touch with the LCOs, and that way you can start having the discussion early, and they can have an interaction. There's certain interactions they can have with you before solicitation is issued that the public may be, able to get that could help you in advance of something going out. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, build those relationships because they definitely do have industry days and things like that, and definitely in some of the rural areas or just in general, we have a lot of leasing work. So especially the as-built requirements are coming out that gives us some flexibility in that area. We have a lot of work, so we're not short of work. So that's what I would say.
Hi, I'm Connie Heyer from Atlas Research in Washington, D.C.
We actually support the IO and TA activations that follow on to the leases. So I kind of have a two-part question. We're actually doing about 6 projects across the country right now. Number one, how is it determined that a lease project is going to get activation dollars for an IO and TA contract? And number two, how is it determined the timing on that? Because we're seeing a vast difference. Sometimes we get a contract and they don't even have a space or design yet, and other times they're already almost under roof. So I'm just trying to figure out how we can track these leases to know future business for us.
Sure. So I work with PCAC as well, and they help with activation. I'm not actually the activation program as well. So every major lease, regardless of function, gets activation funds. So major lease, major construction always get activation fund. And that being said, you're right. We one of the things I've noticed with working with PCAC just since January is we bring some folks on really early on, and then we bring people on later. And so with a lease, I can understand bringing them on 35%, maybe 50%. I don't want to bring people on SFO phase or before it's awarded, and I understand there needs to be some pre-planning, but that pre-planning part, in my opinion, is really owned by the station, someone either a facility planner or someone in engineering staff or someone, because every major lease, major construction has a steps plan, and that to me the basis of going into IOs. I know you guys take that and then you refresh it and all that stuff. So does that kind of answer your question? I would prefer to be probably 35% in design before we brought you guys on personally.
Okay, so I know you're taking Patrick's position, or you're the new
Well,
Patrick.
currently, I don't know you make the request back. Yeah,
We saw differences where, like I said, they didn't have a space, so then there's a gap, because you're hiring SDVSBs, and then there's like a work stoppage, basically, because if they're not ready to go, then we've already hired people to cover the contract. So I was hoping that it would become more of a standardization process where, you get a lease, you get a design, the design's vetted and approved, and then there's a special timing or a window where the IOTA contract is, awarded. So we would be protecting the SDVOSBs from having those issues where they're paying staff and they've been awarded a contract, but there's no work going on.
Yeah. No, I understand, and that's something that we do need to work on, just in general activations that we can focus on. So it's one of those, we just went through a jail audit, and so a lot of the things we're going to revamp, I think activations in general, just to make it better as a whole. And so I know that Deb Janot and his group, PCAC, are going to be involved with just what's the activation going to be like when it goes up. And so we had a year to try to figure it all out and write a directive, and a lot of that's going to be IOTA, and when we bring folks on and the right time, because timing is everything. I agree.
And do you anticipate it not being end of year dollars always? Right now we have a window of like May to September, and I know there's a lot of them in the list that's being tracked. Will there ever be a time when it's awarded throughout the year instead?
It should be throughout the year. So one of the things I started doing is I've told folks to request funding when you need it. Let's not wait until per quarter. So to me, if they can award a IOTA contract, I think we have 3 that have been ready awarded, like first quarter. So again, that's the way I want you to do it. I don't want to wait until end of the year or anything like that. So to me, the earlier you can focus on, the better. So yeah, it shouldn't be fourth quarter is our thing to focus on.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
So before the last question, I just want to follow up on Michael's question. For the architect firms, contractors, developers who want to search for leases, make sure you're using NAICS code 531. That's what the leases are under. So when you get into beta.sam.gov, which we're all trying to figure out, it's 531 instead of the 541 series. Cindy, you get the last question.
It's not even a question. I'm Cindy Doolittle. I'm the Vision 23 Capital Asset Manager. So I have North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, and Nebraska. I'm putting in a plug for my network because we want to get some as-built leases going, which are those simplified leases under 10,000 square feet in space that's already ready to move into or close to ready. If you have any properties like that and you're a developer or somebody getting into that business, I want to talk to you. I'm at booth 1840. It has to be in rural or very rural areas. If it's where I have a hospital, I don't need to talk to you today about this. The capital asset managers know about all their minors, majors, activations, and can help you And their booth numbers are on page 27 of this book. So if you look under VHA, you can find your region, and the capital asset manager or somebody representing a capital asset manager will be at those booths, and they can help you with a lot of these questions. So anyway, that's all I want to say.
So we've been given the last call signal, so we have to wrap up. Thank you all for attending, and please thank the panelists.
If you haven't had your badge scanned, go ahead and get it scanned on your way out. Thank you.
Each other.
Nice to see you again.
So for all of you, this article ran 2 days ago here in the Biz Now real estate newspaper here for Dallas. Okay? Talk something all of us in real estate essentially already know. Houston Hurricane Alley, Charleston Hurricane Alley, etc. And yet, fellow building rental include real property taxes, insurance, property management fee, whatever the landlord's going to do for repairs and maintenance over time. As a locked number, day one on a 20-year flat rate. And I cannot tell you what I'm going to pay for an insurance premium 3, 5, 10, or 15 years out. I beg of you to reconsider. These fit real property values, so you can see a change in your insurance costs.
All right, you come down here so I can not